I'm going to tell you what the goal is of this meeting is to partially just go over some of the, I guess I should turn myself on, is to go over some of the items that I've sent out, to talk a little bit about an analysis that I did on the Board of Ed, at a very high level, and to give support to the Board of Finance for their work that they're going to be doing tomorrow. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everybody can see this. I just want to run through some of the list of potential changes that were sent to the Board of Finance on Friday. Some of these are done deals, so I'm going to run through them quickly. On the library grant, there's a reduction of $15,000 based upon change of the health insurance. The police changed the motorcycle lease, saving $6,800. There's a duplicate cost of a data line, which was a reduction. There's some reduction on the portable toilets. If you recall, on the library, we were doing some work. We sent over a list that was sent by Kara over to Jen, and Jen and Kara found a $13,000 reallocation, just a mathematical error, on the pension. So that's being reduced. There's a $60,000 recalculation on the hydrants and water mains for $60,000, $10,000 for employee benefits. The debt for the school and for the towns, that's based upon the debt that is going to be issued. We'll have a better number on that shortly. And where's Jim Palin? Jim, do you want to talk briefly on that if you can?
So we're going to raise about upwards of $90 million tomorrow. We're going to go to market with a competitive offering of bands and bonds, and the bids are all due at 11 o'clock. So we should know kind of where debt service is shaking out. If I was to look at my crystal ball, I'd probably say that there could be an extra $100,000 of savings there through either the issuance of premium and or lower coupons, which we're currently kind of baking into the overall analysis. But we'll know that by the time we start our meeting, tomorrow evening.
Right. So that doesn't have an item in it, but we'll have it by Tuesday. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Back to the list.
Yeah, you're welcome. If anybody wants to buy muni bonds, tomorrow's a good day. It's a good credit with a good set of finance boards. I think Board of Finance and the F&B here. So.
Okay, tonight at the Board of Selectmen, the police are asking for an additional software maintenance support to add LPR installation. Any additional information that we'll need, I'll send around. But that's being addressed tonight. It was briefly addressed at the Board of Finance's meeting on Thursday. We'll send around the documentation to people so that they understand. It is dependent upon both the Board of Selectmen approval tonight and the Board of Finance consensus to add this to the budget. Same thing, there's a reduction of a cost of $2,600 on the facility repairs. If that goes through, it will not be capital. It'll be moved to maintenance. There's a $2,500 reduction at the request of the Board of Finance from Jen. That goes through. That will be addressed, as well as on the operating. The Board of Finance needs to determine, and we're going to give them some support along the way on what the new Board of Ed budget is. I'm just going to warn, if anybody wants to talk, I am not seeing what's going on as I'm sharing my screen, so we can go from there. On the revenue side, there was a determination to bring the town clerk's revenue back up to what the budget was for this year, even though they were over budget. That's adding 46,500 to budget. Um, there's an additional $9,000 for minimum rate revenues from the parking for the and food truck fees from the fireworks. Fire marshal was anticipating a large Baywater fee this year, which is increasing that by 50,000. Again, just to remind everyone, while we're paid for the inspection in the first year, we have to inspect all the apartments on an annual basis, and we do not receive any additional funding for that. That's just the way it is. Um, my legal term for that is tough nookies, unfortunately. There's some miscellaneous revenue that we're adding back, about $10,000. That's because there are unknown grants that we received during the course of the year. This year, we received several of them. One of them was for the early voting. Another one was for another initiative that the state was doing, and they were greater than 10,000. But adding 10,000 back isn't a bad idea. The 5,000 for the court fees is being added, and there's an increase in the parking fee that will add 20,000. All these things that are in white are already being adjusted in the budget that was sent out. And then there was some just starting discussion on Thursday, and there's the potential, I'd like to say a strong potential, that the Board of Finance will be increasing the investment income that's currently sitting at 3,100. Jim, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
It's technically at 3.1 million. I think just a little sort of typo there.
Yeah.
But our board's still evaluating that and sort of updating our model and so forth. But we did talk about adding, possibly a couple $100,000 more to that.
And quite honestly, just so that the Board of Finance knows my opinion, I am not opposed to adding a couple 100,000 to that number. Not that it matters, but at least we want to try and give the Board of Finance as much support as we can, so there's not any changes that need to be done on the RTM. On capital expenditures, instead of a new 911 recording system, they're just going to upgrade it. That's saving the $10,000. The Fire Commission, there is a determination that we will be budgeting fire engines at this time, but that's not ready for prime time, so it's being removed at this time. It will come back as a special appropriation with bonding for it, so there's no budget impact on that. On the Park and Rec thing, and there's a decision that's supported by members of the RTM F&B committee, as well as those on the Board of Finance, to remove the 8,500 traffic study from Cherry Lawn. There are several reasons for that, one of which is we still don't have a director of Park and Rec, and we don't know what direction they will be taking, as well as the fact they have significant things in ARPA to do. And we also need a little bit more clarification of whether or not this is really a traffic study or a utilization study. I think both F&B and the Board of Finance have expressed some concern that this is an $8,500 study that could lead to a multi-$100,000 initiative later. So we want to make sure we know what it is. There's consideration currently, the Nature Center, for which we're responsible for maintaining the property, has a $200,000 to repave the roundabout and the parking lot. Their estimate that they did receive was subsequently looked at by Ed Gentile, who basically said, for the most part, that it was within line. There were a couple of areas that he pointed out that might have been a little high. They, based upon the status and discussion at the Board of Finance, there's a question of whether or not we can defer some of that and just do patching for and fixing the curbing and the milling that needs to be done on the roadway when we're changing the curbing, and that would remove that down to 75,000. We have done curbing in the past and the milling when we put in sidewalks, for that matter. There was a gatehouse discussion. I don't believe that's going to pass based upon what's going on. There's also the stand-up blower for 16,500. Um, there's no empirical data on, even though they say that they expect to have savings and efficiency, the overtime's basically the same. There hasn't been any quantification of how many hours would be saved. This is something that's been around for a while. The RTM rejected it in the first year of the pandemic. Kate removed it from the budget in the second year that it followed. That one's up in the air. In hearing from Jenny, who's flying back from Utah right now, she would not be opposed to removing that from the budget, is what she told me. The Cherry Lawn Wall Foundation, the question is whether or not we need to do the full amount, because if we are going to be looking at redoing Cherry Lawn before we make the full investment, we should understand whether or not the steps and that is worthwhile. That would we do some fixing on the steps, which would be about 2,600. That would take the 9,000 out of capital and move the 2,600 into operations. Lastly is paving the Tokenique parking lot. When Rich Rudel was asked whether or not this was an absolute necessary or whether or not it was just scheduled, the answer was it was just scheduled. So the question is whether or not we can defer this into next year to reduce somewhat of the capital. The special ed transportation, that's an interesting one because it's currently sitting at $850,000. The most recent estimate, the two members of the Board of Ed, Dan and Jim, requested more information on this and looking at other alternatives. And they then decided to not go with 5 Series 2 buses, but use some other buses that are much less. So the current estimate is 752. We expect that better numbers will be had later in April. And so that gives us time to manage to a better number. It also potentially frees up almost $100,000 of additional funds that can be used to pay down other capital projects. Should that go forward, I believe that the Board of Finance is going to be using that, moving that to the night of our budget meeting as an appropriation. Jim, do you want to give some further explanation on that? I keep on doing this to you, Jim. You still okay?
One of the things that we're considering is taking the revised Board of Ed transportation appropriation and just folding it into their capital budget. And then what we would do is when we actually send it to you all, we would then separate it into a special appropriation so it becomes available, let's just say like 10 days after your RTM meeting, as opposed to the rest of the budget that becomes available on July 1st. The idea was to kind of give the Board of Ed an extra sort of month or so to be able to order those earlier. But I think that decision, while likely, will be finalized tomorrow night.
And that also gives some more refined numbers. And I think Rich has done a good job in getting the items sort of put on hold so that people know that it's just a matter of timing for going out and getting the bids and placing it. The other stuff in the consortium we'll be able to get because they're sort of holding it until it's available for us. So that's good to know. The other issue is some security enhancements that it totals $1 million. I've sent the package out. This was another request for it being off cycle, and I'll be honest, some of it is the film on the windows. It started with being in Ox Ridge, and then it was added to HHR. And when they did the calculation for what they were adding to Ox Ridge, I don't know if it came before the Board of Ed. I don't recall it at a public meeting because it's security. But there was a cost to adding it to Ox Ridge because we're now adding it to 6 other schools. And when you're looking at the cost, it may be over $1 million. So I'm for deferring the security package of $1 million this year and having us take a better look at it over the next year as part of next year's budget, but not at this time. So that's just my opinion. I don't know if anybody else has comments on that, but definitely we'll have an opportunity to discuss it after the Board of Finance does tomorrow. Oh, seeing no hands raised. Oh, Melinda, you got to unmute yourself. There we go.
So if it's going to come to us for a vote, we don't have to talk about it now, but I'm not going to vote to support it because I don't understand why it wasn't in their budget to start with.
That's basically where I think some of us are. And I'm not sure that these films need to be on the windows before we get them onto HHR. I actually had one of the constituents, when I was explaining what these films were doing in the total cost, said, why aren't we just taking it off of Ox Ridge to solve the problem and save some money? But that I'm just saying what a constituent said to me on this. But we need to have a better understanding of what these do and what they don't do. Nick, I'm going to apologize because I know I sent you the wrong link. Nick, I know you're here. I'm going to apologize because I sent you the wrong link. So I just wanted the Board of Finance to hear some of our thoughts on it so that they're aware of what's going on. So that pretty much is the rundown of where the items are as of today on adjustments to the budget. Another adjustment that's going to be discussed tomorrow is, every year we calculate what the last 5 years receipt of payments of taxes that we're issuing. And they're always in the high 99 percentiles. The only change was during the first year of the pandemic, the board went back to, I believe, a 1990 number when there was a recession just to play it safe. And it turned out that we still collected what we had been collecting over the years. So we take the 5-year average as a town, and then we reduce it by 25 basis points. That allows for certain adjustments, challenges, and changes in payment patterns of our citizens and the banks. That results in approximately $300,000, maybe a little bit more. In years, it's been between $300,000 to $400,000. And so it was raised on the at last Thursday's meeting to see whether or not the 25 basis points should continue as a further reduction of what our collection rate is. So this would be if the average collection rate was 99.9% of the taxes issued, we would reduce it to 99.65 of the amount issued. So that's the question of whether or not by changing that, they might free up another $100,000 or so. So that will be determined by the Board of Finance at tomorrow's meeting. And so I just wanted to put that out there. So again, I'm going to ask this question just so that the Board of Finance is aware. We have 2 Board of Finance members here. Is there anything else that there's a proposal? One of the things that I think I must have missed because I was not in favor of it. Oh yeah, there it is. There was a proposal to add $5,000 back to the budget because we had flags in downtown that were given to us as a gift. They became tattered, so they were taken down, American flags. It's not that the people are un-American, but it was taken out of the budget. Somebody wanted to add it back in. I'm not for adding it back in, and I actually believe a GoFundMe page could raise the $5,000 if necessary in this town to go contribute and put them back up if necessary. That's definitely something where contributions can be made. So I'm not for adding that five back in on the flags. Go ahead, Beth.
Jack,
How many flags for $5,000?
That's a lot of flags.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, how many flags are we talking about?
I don't know, but more than one. I think they end up on the flagpole. I mean, with all the time that they were up there, I guess I really didn't pay attention that they were there to know what the count is. But all I'm saying is it's not that I'm against having the flags there, but I think that we can do a GoFundMe page and raise more than $5,000 in this town to if everybody wants the flags back, and then make it, it's a charitable contribution. So that's just my take on it. We'll see what the rest of the Board of Finance does on that one as well.
Jack, I have two questions, if I may.
I'm sorry?
I have two questions, and they're more up, more of a 20,000-foot view on things, but two questions or comments. One is with respect to the security arrangements, and this is more of a policy thing, maybe to be discussed with the Board of Ed. We've avoided, obviously, for obvious reasons, we're not discussing specific technical issues regarding security appropriations. However, I think there are people on our committee, and I think people in the RTM would like to have a different approach. That is, I think we all can be trusted to sign a non-disclosure agreement and to have some visibility into exactly what's being proposed. And I think that's very reasonable. I'd like to just, going forward, I think that'd be a better way to proceed. The second question I had, I wanted to thank Jim for his comments last week, but I want to go back to the question that I posed then, which is, a lot of people, other people in the committee and other people are asking, can you give us the specific criteria for your coming up with a guidance number for both the Board of Selectmen and for the Board of Ed? And if you want to follow up later, that's fine too.
Jim, you can answer now.
I'd love
to. Peter, so I discussed guidance and pretty much in detail, I would say, during the state of the town, and it's a 20-page presentation, and I've talked about it in the past. I'll mention a little bit tomorrow, but I don't want to, Peter, I can certainly kind of give you a little bit more color tomorrow, but I don't want to take up all the time about our 5-year model and so forth tonight.
Just understand there is some things that are going on that the Board of Finance does look at, and there's members of the Board of Finance committee as well as this committee that have been talking about, when rates were low and everything else like that, that we were focused on keeping the mill rate at a certain level. And based upon having growth in the grand list, mostly from the commercial side, having large amounts of money being returned from the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, and some increase in investment in other revenues, we ended up having some extra cash along the way that we previously taxed for, at least on the return of the funds. And we then used to pay down capital in the following year. So some of the requests for capital, some of the growth in the expenses has been masked by some of the other things that are going on in town, like just the growth of the grand list by 1% was generating between $1 and $2 million of incremental revenue every year. Now, some of us believe that just because we have that revenue, we shouldn't be spending it. But at the same time, it's a balance that the Board of Finance has been discussing, as well as what the new Moody's requirements are for what's the appropriate amount that should be in the town's general fund. Now, the guidance was always we shouldn't go below 12%. The number I always used by myself was 16. So 16% of our revenue is something that we control. Whether or not it's 15 or 16, that's pretty good guidance. But there's a new methodology that Jen explained, and I'm going to have Jen join one of our meetings before we do the budget vote to explain some of the Moody's idea and also explain some of the nuances to how we do our taxes, so that if you look at the grand list, it's never the grand list that you can divide to determine the mill rate, because it's an adjusted grand list based upon certain credits that are given to veterans and people that work in town and volunteers at the fire departments in post 53. And so there's a slew of adjustments that go into it. So it's never a straight answer on that. But I'm going to ask Jen to spend a little bit of time, go through that, also go through some of the collection rates that we've experienced, the 25 basis points, the logic for that. Just because we have so many new members, I thought it's appropriate that everybody's brought up to speed before we're going to be presenting to the full RTM on this. So I just want to say that we're also looking at balance sheets, and that's part of what Jim is doing. Some of our debt service is down lower because we're not paying principal right now. We're pushing some principal out on all these bands that we're doing. We're only paying interest only. And then next year, I believe we have to pay 1/30 or of whatever that is to pay it off. But then if we go in the full bonding of it, we can defer payment of principal for another 2 years. And over this 1 to potentially 5 year period, we do have other debt maturing, not as much as what we're going to be issuing, but still enough to make a difference in what our ultimate debt service will be that we'll be paying. So Board of Finance has done a good job of managing that. And I don't know if you want to add some more into that, Jim, but I think that's important to understand how our Board of Finance has been managing our debt service to keep it as level as possible, even with the advent of HHR and the purchase of Great Island. Did I do okay explaining that, Jim? Or is there anything you want to add?
No, Jack, I think that's an important point. Yeah, the two things I would point out are, we bonded half of Great Island over 30 years. And so we've only been made effectively one interest payment on it. We don't start principal until the beginning of the third year. And it's kind of level debt service, so almost kind of 1/27th per year. But the other half, we did a short-term debt where we rolled, and effectively, for the project finance guys on the phone, we capitalized the interest into a new band, which we'll sell to the market tomorrow. And then when that matures, ultimately it'll be rolled out into another 30-year bond where we start amortizing the principal in year 3 following that issuance, all done to try to smooth, if you will, and level our debt service. So I think this was a project, we and you and everyone's been working on for 7 or 8 years. And I think it's put us in a good point to deal with, $85 million of an island and $165 million of newer renovated schools. And I think, a lot of that good work has led us to be able to do this without, having material increases in debt service as a percentage of our overall budget.
Jim, can you give a little bit more explanation on the capitalization of the interest? So as an example, if the bands, if we issued, I'm just going to use some round numbers. If we issued $40 million of bands and the interest on those bands, just saying it was 3%, is 1.2 million for the year, are we now issuing a band for 41,200,000?
Yes.
Okay. So,
and that's standard in terms of how that's done. for kind of capital items. So
But the expense for the interest was in our budget this year. Is that correct?
for half of it, it was debt service is actually down in the upcoming budget year, just because of the way that we've structured it. But you're correct there, and it's something. Listen, we would only do that with the use of bands as we are kind of finalizing what we're going to do with the Great Island and what we did. We issued bands with respect to HHR because we were a little bit unsure of the timing and so forth and how everything was going to move forward. So we effectively floated those for a year at 2.7%. Our treasurer was able to effectively earn that rate back as they sat in investment accounts and so forth. And now that, the team is moving forward with HHR, we're moving to bond out, over 20 years that, that band.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to share is I did a little analysis, and I'm not going to say that this is the end all, but I wanted to take a look. And the way I look at this is in November, the Board of Ed Superintendent and Rich Rudel went through an analysis that said, oops, this is going to be a very high year on budget. And so it was over 6%. And we know guidance was 4%. So those two numbers didn't seem to me. So I did it a real high level, and I'm going to explain what I did, how I came up with it. And you see the part of this here. So it's not that I'm not here to debate this. It's just something that we can use as guidance. So when I looked at personnel and I looked at the current fiscal year, personnel represented 65% of the total budget. Now, the teacher's contract over the 3 years that we all approved, is up 13%, but I'm using a 4% rate because not everyone who's paid in town is, other than the certified staff, was getting 4% raises. Some got less than 4%. And this doesn't take into account the turnover ratio, where even though that's part of the reason why they're running a deficit this year, the last I saw was someplace in the neighborhood of $232,000. In other words, they budgeted that we would be able to hire certified staff, at a lower rate than the person leaving. And we have found that that has not been the case in this current year. But anyway, at 65% of the budget with a 4% rate, that says that they went into this budget year without adjusting for turnover or changes in staff at 2.6%. Now, I'm going to say this now. If in fact I'm just using this as an example, that the Board of Ed decides to not hire 5 paras and hire 5 certified staff, they're coming in at different salaries. That's a Board of Ed decision, but they have to find how they're going to pay for that based upon the analysis that's here. They don't just get a pass that, we're going to add staff and that's okay.
Jack,
that's going to.
Do you have this in a spreadsheet? And if so, can you share?
Yeah, I thought I sent it to people, but I will send it after the meeting.
Okay.
The transportation, I looked at the transportation, and that's the next one over here. And we knew that it was under negotiation. It was going up by 12%. So the transportation is in 3 different areas. It's regular pupil, out of district special ed, and athletics. And the total appeared to be an increase of 6.7%. Out of district, the Board of Ed had already planned to take out $113,000 because they were going to purchase 2 Suburbans to add to their 6 that they're operating. In order to come up with, based upon the new analysis that they're doing, even though the savings that they're suggesting in their analysis is greater than this amount, the only amount that I took out of budget was the remaining 203 or 204 thousand. So when I did the comparison of the 3.2 million for the current year to 3.2 for the next year, it ended up being less than 1%. And at $13,000, and the fact that there's other savings that the Board of Ed is claiming, I moved that what had been a driver is no longer a driver when I look at the 25 budget. Next thing is, we account for most of special ed with the salaries. So that's already was accounted for, any growth in there. Again, we're not talking about changes in personnel. The real driver here that was discussed and was that the outplacement for special ed students at both non-public and public schools has increased by 25% of what's in the budget last year or in the current year versus what they're projecting for in the budget for 25. Now, understand, some of the numbers that are in 25 is what they're paying this year. So that's part of the reason why there's running a deficit at this time. But between that and not meeting the turnover ratio is part of the reason why they started with $700,000 in the hole, which they brought down to currently about 200,000. It may go up a little bit by 50,000 based upon a change in the ECR. When I looked at that, and I looked at what the percentage of special ed was as a percentage of the total budget, and multiplying it times 25%, that says that's a 1.4% increase to where they were, bringing their increase to 4%. These are things that are really contractual. We don't really have a lot of say on these just basic standard numbers. Next thing I looked at was healthcare. And there's been a lot of numbers tossed around. And while the premiums may have gone up by 12, 13% to the Board of Ed, the actual expense line item in healthcare is only up 6.8%. And what's projected. So I took the increase as being that representative of the increase, multiply that times the approximate 13% of what healthcare represents, and I'm up 0.88 on a budget. The last thing that they didn't mention, but has come up, is that the retirement and the OPEB net was higher than expected. And if we go down to that, we're down from it going from 1.5 million to almost 1.8 million, representing a 16% increase in the budget. That represents 1.3% of the total budget, so that's 0.22. So when I get done with just those drivers, those 5, I'm at 5.12. If I say, okay, that equals 87 or almost 88% of the total budget, the remaining 12% is guidance. That's 3%. So all the other things that you want to do, that's the 12% you got to play with. So it means that savings in staff, savings in electric, other savings that are throughout, maybe insurance, this, that, and the other, are offset by things you want to do. If you want to add staff and other things like that. And a 3% guidance, that equals 3.7. Now, again, we had a student that was in outplacement that left in December. That was in Rich's report in January, I believe. And so there was a reduction in what we were anticipating in ECR from the Board of Ed. But I don't know that the reduction in the tuition was reflected in the fiscal year 25 budget. I didn't see it as one of the line items presented. So that's still a question that leaves some areas of discussion. So just high level, that says that if we're going with guidance, we're looking at the drivers. This is at most a 5.5% increase over the prior year. And it's in line with what F&B was saying, which was when you have drivers that are already high on what's going on, the healthcare, the special ed tuition, and the personnel, just standard personnel costs, then you can't be doing business as usual. And that's where the discretion of the Board of Ed is what we're looking for in that number. But it does give range to say, okay, maybe because of the circumstances and the contractual obligations that we have, either by law for special ed or by new bus contracts and other things. And by the way, they're still negotiating the bus contract. So while it was originally up 12% in the budget, there's not to say, excluding the special ed and ELP transportation, that's not to say it's going to end up at 12%. So there's plenty of flexibility in what's going on. Also, I've mentioned a couple of things, but, I'm not going to mention the desks again, but that's out there for 150,000 that was never addressed. It also says that when you're in a tough situation like this, there's a replacement of the library carpet. And maybe you don't replace the carpet this year. You fix the leak, you maybe give the new furniture that's there, but whatever that amount is, for some reason it's like $40,000-$50,000. Maybe you defer it to another year. Those are the decisions, because it doesn't matter if you're taking it from capital or from operations. Those are decisions that are available. I'm just saying that there are things that are out there that can be changed: deferral of purchase of uniforms, deferral of technology, and other things that Rich and the Board of Ed may have better knowledge than we do. And the purpose of this is not to get into the nitty-gritty. It's to say, if I was to look at the high level based upon guidance, where would I be at with some of the information that I know, even with the knowledge that the 2.6% increase in salaries, if the staff is staying the same, could easily be less than that. Might be more, but it could also be less. So I'm coming up that the range that the budget could be, if I was saying, based upon some circumstances that have come up post the original guidance, I'm looking at it a 5.25% to 5.5% increase in the budget. Now, I was looking for the form that I had before. If you give me a little while, I might be able to find it. You thought I had this up. Of course, I never had it up when I needed to. So I'm now showing this, which I had sent around to members of our committee, and I think I copied Jill on it, but I also sent it to the Board of Finance, that said, here are the basic numbers. Here's what in the first column, what the Board of Ed approved. This would be the amount to receive to achieve any of these increases on the budget. Based upon, even before I did the analysis, I knew 4% wasn't going to fly this year. But this was the original superintendent's budget, and you can see that there's some differences of numbers here based upon what was added back into the budget by the Board of Ed. But part of this is determine where you want the Board of Ed's total number to be. And this basically says this would be the reduction of the increase to achieve that percentage. And I went with increments of 25 basis points for the most part. But if you wanted 5.3% increase, that's easily calculated. And that saves both the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance and ourselves from figuring out what the reduction should be. So those are the basic points that I have for tonight. I don't know if anybody wants to discuss that analysis. I did not send it to the Board of Finance. I sent it to Jim only, because they have their own conversations that are going on, and they're doing their own analysis. So sometimes it's good to see where the two come in. But I think that I can speak for the committee by saying we've all said at various times that this increase is a little bit too high. So I don't know if anybody wants to add a comment to that. I've heard as much as people saying that they thought, members of the committee who've communicated with me, that a 1 to 2% decrease in their budget increase they thought was reasonable. So is there any other comments on that? If not, we've pretty well covered most of what we needed to cover in today's meeting. I'm going to ask Jim a question before we do the last two things on our agenda. Jim, does that give you some help in the work that you guys have to do tomorrow? We lost Jim. Oh, well, apparently we've lost Jim. But okay, so before we go, I put on the agenda. Both Nick and Peter went up to Vermont to watch the eclipse. So I'm curious if they might be able to add anything to what their experience was and what they saw and other things. So Peter, you can go first.
Just if you get a chance to do it, do it. It's spectacular. Totality where I was is only 1 minute. But it was worth the 2-hour drive each way, and for where we are in southern Vermont, and just spectacular.
Nick, do you want to explain your experience of today?
Yeah, I was I found it really quite amazing. Watching it, and then when it sort of got darker and darker, and for me, what was really cool about the totality, I think we were maybe 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes up here, a little bit northern Vermont, was just the 360-degree sunset. So you sort of, you could turn yourself around in a complete circle, and everywhere you saw was a sunset. And then, you could take your glasses up and look directly at where the moon was blocking the sun. So it was a really, I think for me, my wife kind of led the charge, and her roommates from college were all gathering, and I sort of came along not expecting too much. And I found it really quite great.
So we had glasses to try and look at at what was going on. I do have a very cute picture of my soon-to-be 3-year-old grandson with his glasses and his mom, my daughter, holding his head to know where he's supposed to be looking. And she did say that her husband gave a better explanation of what the solar eclipse was than she did, because she told her son that the sun was going to eat up the moon for a little bit and then spit it out, which really wasn't the scientific things that were necessary.
It's
but
not bad. That's not bad.
But yeah. So Dad gave him a scientific, and at 3 years old, I don't think that he understood either one of them. So I will tell you that little child, just a little quick aside, we've been, I know that he goes to watch men play hockey all the time, and his nanny takes him down to a hockey rink, and he loves the ice cleaning machine and other things. And one of the players finally, because he's there all the time, gave to the Zambolias or whatever it's called, driver, a puck to give to my grandson. And he was real excited as he came home with a painted rock, which is what he called the puck. And when we read the puck, all of a sudden we realized that he's been watching the NHL Washington Capitals at their practice facilities for the entire winter. And so they gave him a Washington Capitals practice puck to take home with him. So we just thought that was probably one of the coolest things, besides the fact that he called it painting. But all right, we have some minutes to approve. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as written? I have Bill accepting. I'll take Beth as the second. All those in favor, say aye. Okay,
Aye.
that's I'm going to accept it that we have a full acceptance of that. And with that, I'll ask, you see, not bad. And now we covered a whole bunch of stuff. Is there anything else on this budget that anybody else wants to hear or discuss before we get it from the Board of Finance? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. And before we adjourn, I will tell you that I believe that at tomorrow's meeting, we will find out that we are not having an April meeting. But you still have to wait for the Rules Committee that's meeting tonight to make that final decision. So that's based upon what Jim said, that the only item would have been the school transportation. So all those in favor, I need a motion to adjourn first. Who's going to make the motion? I have Charles on the first one. I'll take Melinda on the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I'll end this meeting with the comment of Go Huskies. So
Yeah.
have a good time. Take care, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Jack.